Dando ahora continuidad a nuestros trabajos, vamos a hablar dónde está el blockchain funcionando hoy en día. Me gustaría de invitar a Rick Wheeler. Rick, please. Alex Puig. Marcelo García. Cristina Dolan. E Ignacio Badía Liberal.
We're taking the middle seat, right? So
Yes.
We live?
Technically, you're in the middle.
I don't agree.
Yeah, he disagrees already.
I disagree. Just for starters.
You know, he's Spanish, I don't know. But, so we're here to talk about what's actually happening in blockchain today. Not theory, not promise, but what's going on in the space. So I'm going to start with you, Alex, since you're here next
Why?
to me. You're more handsome than me, that's why. Oh. But,
Thank you.
You know, I'd love you to talk a little bit about what you do, why that's important in the space, and what the practical application is today.
So basically, we're trying to go beyond the hype. It's like I've been hearing about blockchain will change the world. You can do everything with the blockchain. Truth is that
blockchain doesn't cure cancer.
Yeah, not that much. Mm-hmm. So what we're doing, I don't like talking about that. It's some kind of because it's not sexy. Whenever I start saying we have a company, we have a bunch of engineers, and we are using blockchain technology to solve real problems, at the beginning people think, okay, that's crazy, that's amazing. You know, you're a blockchain developer. Yeah, yes, I am. So you do this kind of, you're changing the world. No, I'm not.
But in a way, blockchain is changing the world. Marcelo, I'm sorry to cut you off, but Marcelo, can you talk about how blockchain is actually changing the world today?
I would like to talk first about, first
tell us,
please to be here, no, thanks for the invitation and all that, but the one thing that just came to mind is that how is the blockchain working today has the visible part and the invisible part. So when you say the blockchain doesn't cure cancer, I'm like, I wish I could.
Well, okay, it's the underlying technology that can lead to
it opens so many doors, opportunities. So it's the great enabler in so many ways. And we can talk about certain things. We definitely cannot talk about others that are under NDA. But the biggest impact is, in fact, as Alex just described, is very much linked to this dictum that technology should either be beautiful or invisible. And blockchain is a technology that should really be invisible because I have never seen a beautiful blockchain in my life. So I hope that someone will come up with that. CryptoKitties can be very agreeable to the eyes.
Again, CryptoKitties.
Yes, okay. We'll get back to cats.
I have, by the way, yeah.
Congratulations.
Not sure.
The main point being it's an iteration of continuous improvement, process by process. All the intermediation layers that can be replaced, they will be slowly but surely. So if there are efficiencies to be had, someone is going to achieve them because now we can.
But that's exactly what I'm doing. I'm doing processes. So instead of like going
Well, tell the audience what you're doing.
We're going step by step. We're just solving problems for companies. Companies usually, they come to us with a problem, basically. If a company comes to us and say, we need the blockchain, it's a no. If they come with a real problem they have involving many companies, then we can just talk to them. And then we use the blockchain to create a process. A smart contract, at the end of the day, is a process. So basically, we build a process in the blockchain that can help all these companies to work together. So it's not sexy. It's processes and mainly digital ID. It's something I will speak about later. But we are doing companies identifying themselves on the blockchain and like agreeing on something. It's a process.
Well, I think you're hitting a thread there, and Christina, I'd love you to actually chime in on this. Digital identity, what does that really mean?
So having been somebody who's had my identity stolen a number of times, having it just be digital makes it even scarier. But I think that finding a mechanism by which to truly authenticate in such a way that it can't be stolen, I think is a really critical piece. And I think Alex and I were speaking in the back room and said that, because if you think about the blockchain as something that can have trusted peer-to-peer transactions, but the technology ends at a certain point, and where the people that are involved, you still have to keep them honest. So having that mechanism. But I wanted to answer the question that you asked earlier in terms of how blockchain is changing the world. And I remember, I think it was like 4 years ago, I was at my alma mater in MIT and giving a talk. And at that point, it was really about stored value of Bitcoin. And what was kind of interesting about that talk was that when I was preparing for my talk, I found this research that their migrant workers send 3 to 4 times more money to their developing countries than the UN does in terms of world aid. And the Gates Foundation had pointed out that if you could just decrease this huge gap, I mean, so some of these people are paying like 30% on these transactions, and the Gates Foundation felt that if you could decrease this just by 5%, it would mean $16 billion more for developing countries. And while that was a theme about 4 years ago, I think that what that marketing has done is that it's caused a lot of providers in the space, including Swift, to assess how much they charge and what their value, and what kind of technology they use. And as a matter of fact, Swift has now come out with blockchain. So I think that just the mere mention of disintermediation has caused a lot of the incumbents to analyze how they're performing in this space, and has actually brought down costs significantly throughout, which has made that use case of cross-border payments not the leading reason to go to crypto. So it is a very motivating innovation mechanism to even begin to talk about disintermediation. And my company, IXIGER, is in insurance, right? And obviously the financial space has had disintermediation in financial trading, which I've been involved with the past 10 years. So I think that just the mere mention of the technology makes the incumbents start to think, oh, wait a second, what's coming down now? So
yeah, I think more recently it has, hasn't it? I mean, well, you have people like Elizabeth Rosiello at BitPesa, who actually crushed Western Union in Kenya. Mm-hmm. She crushed them so hard, she got kicked out. It was that bad. So Ignacio, tell us what Getronics is doing in making a difference in how enterprise software is being impacted by blockchain.
Okay, in Getronics, myself, I am taking my first steps, so it's an honor for me to be in this roundtable. So Getronics wants to improve the business of our customers, and definitely the models are changing, and we have to, and we want to have on top of that, right? So we have already started to do some, let's say, first steps on trying to apply the blockchain technology in some of the solutions that we already have developed, right? As an example, we are using blockchain just to ensure the communication between our hospital information system, that is called Sphere, and the catering providers, just to assure that the information that is sent from the hospital information system to the catering provider is secure, is complete, and nobody can produce any kind of problems that could be difficult situations for allergic people, for people that have intolerance in front of some foods. So we are applying today this technology as an extension for our let's say, former business solution, right?
I think you're ahead of the game. Christine, I'm going to ask you again, chime in on healthcare. What are some of the challenges in healthcare that our audience could expect to encounter?
So I would actually say it's the same challenges you have across all enterprise, in that you need data for 2 reasons. One, for trust, because especially the millennials don't trust, right? So unless you have the provenance, as you mentioned, or a mechanism by which to prove the journey of an asset or an item or whatever that might be, you won't be trusted from your brand perspective. And then the second reason is that the government doesn't trust you. So this obligatory regulatory requirement to have all the data for AML, KYC is not going away anytime soon. MiFID in Europe is about the journey of a trade. Trading systems used to be about matching engines. Now you have to have every little step along the journey of a trade, from the conversations, all the pricing on the venues. That all has to be available within 24 hours, right? Mm-hmm. So we're kind of living in a world right now in which we're being forced to prove trustworthiness, both to protect the brand and to be in business for government purposes. And so the use of this next generation, which I think about enterprise was one generation, cloud was the next, and blockchain as a component of overall systems is needed in order to provide this truthful components both for your brand and your consumers, as well as for government regulatory observation. Absolutely.
So, Marcelo, let's talk about trust for a minute, and truth, and authentication. So in light of GDPR, in light of the recent press release from the EU Commission, in which they are now having a blockchain thread within their conversation. I wouldn't call it guidance, actually. I would call it a thread of conversation. What does that mean for the EU? Because you work with the UN and you've worked on this, in terms of integration, in terms of mindset, in terms of actual implementation.
Well, the first thing is that there is this heuristic of the more regulated the industry, the greater the impact a blockchain architecture will have, but also the longest it will take for it to be implemented. So you have energy and water distribution and everything else. You will have vast efficiencies. That's a very slow process, so it's perfect for the UN. It's perfect for the EU because that's what they do. They achieve consensus over longer periods of time to have the greater picture in mind. What is happening right now within the UN, and I know a little bit less about the EU because I'm not directly connected with them, is that agencies like UNHCR and the World Food Program, they need blockchain solutions to be able to distribute vouchers without the very high numbers of fraudulent cases that they have today, because the conditions on the ground are very harsh. Like 3 weeks ago, I was in a refugee camp in Bangladesh, and you have 1 million people, 800,000 of those arrived in a period of 8 months. They had to build a completely new city. How do you make sure that they stay alive and thrive? Well, within the context that they have, which is obviously far from ideal. So you start with the agencies that need it the most. So it's almost like a survival toolkit because they are really at subsistence level. So
again, at a human level.
Yeah, so any increase in quality, efficiencies, saving money, or delivering better quality services makes a lot of sense. So you'll see those agencies that are out there on the front lines deploying those things first. Then you have the other agencies going, oh, this one is interesting. Oh, by the way, this is open source code, so I can just get most of what you've done, adapt to my own circumstances, and move on with it. And lots of those initiatives, especially because the UN and I would say also the EU, they're built on consensus and they're run by people with a political mindset. Failure is very painful. Or if they're involved in something that fails or is perceived to be a failure, maybe they won't get reelected. So their risk tolerance is very, very thin, meaning that someone else needs to take out the risk first, which is fine if you're UNHCR because you really need it, or the World Food Program or equivalent agencies. And once it's a proven solution, which is similar to what you have today with Bitcoin, around for 10 years, not unhackable, but unhacked up to now, like as you mentioned in your interview.
Until quantum.
Yeah. Well, and then you're going to have a quantum blockchain and
in Cincinnati in America, the quantum blockchains.
Yeah. Your interview was watching the Blockchain and Us, documentary interview. You're talking about military grade encryption. So Bitcoin is inconsequential from the greater perspective, but it proves a point. It's one of the best pilots you could have because it generates so much value. And what you're having with blockchains and international organizations and beyond is let's figure out what will stick around for longest. And the one example I'm very happy to share with you is a company called GuardTime. Full disclosure, the owners are friends of mine. I don't make any money with them or through them, but I really, really like what they're doing. And guess what? GuardTime is 11 years old. Mm-hmm. So they started doing blockchain solutions before the Bitcoin was released.
Okay, so let's get something straight. So distributed ledgers are not new. Smart contracts are at least 30 years old, okay? So we're talking about blockchains with encryption as the substrate, right? The underlying technology as being the turning point in these existing technologies that create a new way of doing things, no?
Yeah, well, you have many parallels with that, the LED lights that are blinding us today. Red LEDs have been around for a very long time. Mm-hmm. Green LEDs have been around for a shorter period of time. And this is all related to the wavelength.
You mentioned blue, by the way.
Yeah, but blue was the last one and hardest to crack.
Yeah.
And it was, in fact, a Japanese PhD who won the Nobel Prize for Physics, who invented that, using beer cans for his first pilot. I have the picture of his beer cans coiled so that he could come up with the wavelength that was required to produce the blue LED. And then again, if you have green, red, and blue, you have white. So what we have today is basically, oh, look at that. We just figured out how to...
It's an amalgam of technologies put together to create something new, and that is the point. So as a developer, Alex, you know, what does this mean for you as you look at the landscape and you work with enterprises and organizations? I mean, what is working for you and what is not working for you? What can you do and what cannot you do?
You can do a lot of things, but I think it's a change of mindset. I come from a world where all of these companies, they used to work, well, they're still working with their own data silos. So all the data, it's isolated inside of their own, you know, protected walls, whatever. So, but that's bad because, like, imagine I have my euros in a bank, have money in my bank account. That's cool. That's my money. So imagine I just go to the CTO of the bank and I say, okay, I'm a developer. I built this piece of software. Please, can you put it in your backend so I can just play with my money? Don't worry, I will only play with my money. Yeah, that's it. Probably he will laugh a lot. So basically, what we are doing and we are succeeding is first convincing them, it's a change of mindset, that probably these assets should not be like replicated in many silos all around the world, but shared in a common database. That would be the blockchain. So instead of having these assets, and an asset can be money, but can be, you know, share of a company, kilowatts, can be gigabytes of connection, anything. So once you move here...
It can be, but Ignacio...
We are doing that.
Okay, you're doing that. Okay, thank you. I was trying to get to that.
Yeah, we are working on that, and we are doing that now.
Okay, so Ignacio, you hear this, right? Now, with your practical experience with Getronics, how do you find the buy-in with your clients, and how do you lead them into this way of thinking, this way of being?
I think I agree with Alex Bailey, because you know that since we are a technology company, maybe the first temptation is to go from the technology to the solution, right? So we are trying to find the way to change the business model, to change the mindset, to convince them that there is a huge opportunity using this kind of technologies that, okay, we are going to be proficient on that. So we are able to manage that. Those technologies.
It's baby steps, no?
Yes, but you know, you have to go step by step because it's a question of mindset changing. So it's not really easy to convince them, but sorry. But I think we are on the way to demonstrate to everybody that even though if you are not interested, the things are going to change. So you have to be better part of it instead of saying, okay, it's not, nothing is happening. A lot of things are happening, and we should take advantage of them.
You want to comment on that?
Well, I totally agree that there are lots of things that are happening. I mean, there's been a lot of focus on the coins themselves, but there's been some innovative uses of blockchain. And so there's a Fortune 500 company that I won't mention the actual name of the company, but they were concerned about their brand, and they realized that if they allowed their customer data to go to a third party for processing, and somehow that got exposed, that it would affect their brand. And so with a team of 4 people, they sort of amputated Hyperledger and then created a faster, more efficient blockchain, and that has some data protection in it, and they created a blockchain to sort of settle some back office claims work for their organization. And much to their surprise, because blockchain is not that efficient, they ended up saving money, but more importantly, they wanted to protect their brand. And so there are a lot of these little point solutions that are coming about, being driven by a business need that really aren't getting that much visibility, but are serving that purpose. And while everybody says, well, you could do that with traditional databases, I think that we live in this world with these siloed environments, right? And the people who have that data realize it's very expensive to maintain it and clean it. And then the other piece of that is that Cambridge Analytica scenario, in that if you do give it to someone, there's a liability. And so if you're not collecting the information you need to represent the journey, whether it be healthcare data or trading or supply chain, it's very difficult to be able to go back to the shipping company and say, hey, can I get that information about the pears that were shipped from this farm, because I'm trying to reconstruct this journey. They're not going to give you an API and open up their whole database after the fact, and so you're not going to get the data later, right? So I think that because of the fact that we live in a world that these journeys are now required for trust as well as compliance, you need this parallel architecture that sort of hops across all these siloed systems and takes these little pieces of data to assemble those journeys that are a requirement today.
Well, speaking of that journey, I mean, we have Walmart. I assume some people have heard about the Walmart blockchain. So they're putting produce, they're asking that anyone who wants to be a vendor of produce to Walmart has to be on the Walmart blockchain, right? So that's a top-down solution, right? Now, there's an argument, I think, for a bottom-up solution for guilds and for enterprises to band together to create new forms of value by actually creating their own provenance, their own authentication. So do you have any comment on that, Alex? And what do you think about that?
I don't really like this kind of initiatives where, big companies, they just jump in and they try to maintain control. Because usually, like getting all this data, it's about control. I work with many of these companies, and when I ask them, okay, you have all this data about your users, but do you use it? They don't. But they're so afraid of just leave it alone or just give this control away that they come up with new, expensive, privative ways of doing something that maybe it's not the right way. For a small company, doing this probably makes no sense because they are not just working for Walmart, they are working for many different companies. So that's one of the things that we're trying to build in Latvia. So there's a lot of companies working together, sharing a common ground, but not just led by one big company, but all of the big companies. So if you can do that, it's about the standards, because then the onboarding process for a bank like Santander could be exactly the same onboarding process that you will do for Endesa or Iberdrola or any kind of company. And then, yes, you are helping, you are distributing information, and then you are helping all these small companies to go by the law, to be compliant, and then to have a more efficient processes. Once again, everything are processes on the blockchain. So whenever one of these big guys, they come and say, okay, we're going to do blockchain, but it's like they're trying to replicate the same thing that they've been doing all the time, but now with a different technology. It's like, okay, now you're not using Oracle anymore, you're using MongoDB. I don't care. For me, it's exactly the same pain.
Okay, okay. Marcelo, can you chime in on that? Pardon me. I think that there are arguments in both directions about that. But on a human scale, when you talk about the authentication of people as supply chains, quite frankly, especially in the refugee situation, what do you think are the biggest challenges? I think what's being clear here is that authentication, supply chain, any kind of provenance or verification is a point of access for blockchain technology in the world, yeah? So as you've seen it, what is the biggest hurdle for acceptance in your space? And what's the biggest opportunity, by the way?
Yeah, it's worth mentioning, I think up to this point no one described that. Blockchains are subdivided into two major groups. You have the permissionless, so any computer can download the software and join the network as a new node. And you have permissioned networks, which basically means only selected computers from companies in a specific club, so to say, are allowed to have access. And you're going to have lots of permission networks between large companies, not the Walmart case of the lettuce producer and the giant multinational, but as we all seem to agree that supply chain is one of the killer apps of the blockchain, this is highly relevant. We'll get to the point of individuals down the line. So what I have heard in the conferences I organize, I have a series called cryptoexplorers.org, so expert level blockchain folks from all around the world. We're talking about what's next, so very similar to what you're doing with Agentic from a different angle. And one of the most surprising presentations I had was from the CEO of Swisscom Blockchain, who managed to be so convincing when it comes to permission networks, saying true large corporations and how you unleash value by having a blockchain between them, that even the hardcore Bitcoiners said permission networks is just never going to happen, etc. They changed their mind. And guys that for 5 years said that they don't believe in it, after the presentation, they, in public, like in the group, said this is really relevant. And what happens there is really interesting because we tend not to understand that at our level. But when you have a supply chain, the company upstream and downstream, they're your potential competitors. They could start doing what you're doing in a slightly better way, and they'll take your lunch. So when you have a blockchain in between, what does happen and is being developed today is that you only share with that layer precisely the information that is required. You don't have to open APIs, you don't have to go any deeper. It's just like, what is exactly what you need to be able to get a job done? I know I insert a personal story here. So tonight I'm flying to India, because in 2 days I'm speaking in Gujarat. So the Prime Minister of India is from there, and they have the startup forum. And I had to apply for the Indian visa, which is 3 pages long. They're asking for the full name of my father, my mother, and their ID cards. So on top of that, their personal ID system with 1 billion people got hacked. You can buy it for a couple of dollars on the internet. And these guys are asking me for very private personal information when I know they can't handle it. Now, obviously, I'm very uncomfortable with that kind of situation. And if I had a personal ID system that allowed me to make the Indian government feel comfortable to give me a visa without me having to share all of that, everybody would win. Because this data is not being used, they're just collecting it.
That's super interesting, and you're touching on a really important point. And I'll take it out of human scale right now to business in intellectual property. Christina, do you want to talk a little bit about how IP is being transformed by the technology?
Well, actually, I think I'm going to talk a little bit about the inverse of that, because I think one of the phenomenon that has actually created a lot of innovation in this space is the mere fact that you have open source. And open source enables a lot of innovators to take what other people have created and innovate on top of that. And I'll give an example. So Quorum, which was created by JP Morgan, is a sort of an amputated version of Ethereum. And they've lopped off that economic layer of coins.
I love the word. Okay.
And so, so after they created this new version of blockchain, which is, I think, 800 transactions per second, a little faster than Ethereum, they realized that they had a data privacy issue. And so they decided, let's look around and see who's done something. Oh, look, Zcash has done something. So this ability to take innovation based upon the success of other blockchains is something that you see a lot going on in this space. And the companies that do that, for example, Quorum has like 200 patents as a result of their innovative style, regardless of what Jamie Dimon says about Bitcoin. So I think that while intellectual property is something that I think we all want to have respected, I think that this inverse idea of using open source as a mechanism by which to create these little Lego blocks that are used for innovation kind of means that the speed of innovation is going to happen even faster than it ever has. And once again, if you think about it, these little Lego blocks, a little bit what you were saying before in terms of trying to solve customer problems, I mean, if you look at R3 and Quorum, they're...
Well, for the audience, would you explain who R3 is?
So R3 is a consortium based out of New York that has engaged both the banking and finance industry first and now the insurance industry. And at first they were doing all these prototypes and really demonstrate what you could do.
In finance and banking mostly they started.
Yeah, and now they're in the insurance space. And they were using Hyperledger, which is basically a workflow blockchain with no economic layer. But then through this whole process, they realized, well, wait a second, there are new needs for our community, and therefore they created something called Corda, which has distributed ledger properties, but maybe not some of the other holistic blockchain properties in terms of distributing and consensus to the extent that we know about in the public sector. So I think that you'll see this innovation occurring faster, and you know, I don't know, you know, what the Austria's version of, you know, their blockchain will look like, but I think that this innovation allows for very specific business needs to be embedded using real-life use cases and sort of learning from everybody else's work.
Yeah, I want Ignacio to chime in on this, but I want to make a clear distinction. You are totally correct, but I think both are happening simultaneously. Mm-hmm. So when you look at the payment rail portion of blockchain as we know it today, you have open source on one side, developers like Alex coming in, creating new things on the fly, mm-hmm. and then you have the immutable transactional part of the blockchain on the other side. So as he creates new things, he's doing derivative works. And those of you who are in IP will understand this. Those derivative works then have a consistent and constant payment rail between them. So, for instance, it's just fractional payments. So if our four panelists separately converge online and create a new code in a new application, let's say Getronics, let's say Ignacio says, okay, we're going to monetize that. We see it, we're on GitHub, we're going to monetize it, but they've created it. If he puts it to market, they get their part, and they get their part simultaneously through the exact same rail that they're building. Now, I think that's a really important aspect of blockchain. The omni-payment rail, the omnidirectional payments.
The good thing here is I think we need more collaboration. I'm part of the community, so part of what I do is open source. So I build libraries and then I open source them. And it's really good for us because then I get invited to events, so it's funny.
Yeah.
But something that you said is quite true. I think right now the community, the people building Ethereum, the people building Bitcoin, cryptographers, developers, hackers, there's a lot of amazing people building an amazing technology. And probably, and including me, we are forgetting that these companies, like big companies, corporate, they have the channels to get this technology to the people. Mm-hmm. And that's something I really want.
But Ignacio, he's our big company guy.
Yeah.
Okay, so from a
so
big
we need this collaboration.
From a big company perspective, so what do you think about what Alex is saying? Is open source in blockchain a good thing or a bad thing in your view?
No, I think it's a good thing. Again, I think the beautiful thing is to know the technology, to collaborate with all these people, to be able to find solutions for business needs or for even creating new business models. But I think the value that a big company could bring to the market is just to identify, to collaborate with all these brilliant people, just to figure out how can we improve the experience of our customers. So we don't have to do it by ourselves at all. So I think we have to be in close contact with people that are innovating at a really high pace, just to be able to build really brilliant stories, to tell the customers and to try to convince them, to try to let's say, to mitigate the fears that some of them in the new world they feel, and to be able to work together. I think it should be a good example of collaborative economy.
Super good point. I mean, Marcelo, let's talk about building bridges between now, yesterday, now, and tomorrow. Yeah. So how do you approach trying to sell through a blockchain application? whether it's to a government, to an NGO, to a corporation, whomever.
Yeah, and an elephant comes to mind. Not the one from the Alex.
You mean the,
Yeah.
depending on what?
No, not that one. When an elephant is moving in the jungle or savanna, it destroys lots of trees and turns lots of stones. And we're talking about GitHub here, and the tiny little detail worth mentioning, they've just been acquired by Microsoft. So
And we moved to
open
GitLab.
source. And
We moved to GitLab, by the way.
Yeah, we weren't going to go there, but yeah, okay.
But I was talking with Mr. Blockchain from Microsoft.
Who, York? No.
York, yes.
York Rhodes.
The third,
Okay.
the number 3. You know, I don't know if the previous were working in DLT and blockchain, but
He's not here. He's a smart guy.
Yeah,
Okay.
He belongs here for sure. And
He was invited. He couldn't make it, but yeah.
so the thing is that Microsoft had to acquire GitHub because they were for sale, and the geopolitical conversation between giant companies is, if you don't take it, I will. So they had to do that as a defensive measure, and if they have the best intentions or not, it's irrelevant because acquisition will go through. So they are promising that GitHub is going to remain independent, and of course the alternatives, but they are the elephant crossing the jungle, turning stones. And you have companies that go there and like, oh, look what was under the stone. There's a full ecosystem at the micro level, which can benefit from movements made by the elephants and larger species out there. And the people who are going to win are the ones who can get that level of perspective saying, this is my opportunity, and build something they can then scale.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean,
Can I be the moderator?
Please.
Just for a while. How do you deal with IP? I'm trying to convince many big companies when I develop software like this, I'm going to build this is your business model. Of course, we're not going to play with that. But some of the libraries we need to build, we can do them open source. Mm-hmm. It's good for everyone, and then they are safer, secure. People will audit. But then, of course, they say no all the time. How can I convince them?
Well, you have to get a good attorney. I think we have one here in the front row who's going to be speaking later.
Where's
Raise
Joel?
your hand.
Get
I
up
think
here,
he's
Joel.
worked with a lot of these companies.
Coming next.
But I do think it requires having really good legal counsel to maneuver the presentation of simple logic as innovative enough to deserve a patent, and then to be able to sort of defend that. So I think that while you see all this innovation happening at the speed of light, I think if you don't have a lot of legal muscle, I think it's really difficult to pursue.
Well, I'm actually going to, since you're the moderator, I'm going to be a guest for a minute.
Yeah. Okay. So how do you think?
I'm going to tell you how IP has worked with blockchain since 2000. Well, digital rights management anyway, which is IP, has worked since 2015. A company called Monograph in New York has been actually digital watermarking, digital content on blockchain, on the internet, so that it creates a scenario where they will actually, the payment from a sponsor for video will come into the blockchain on the rail. That video will be placed on a website, and based on the amount of eyeballs it gets, and the click-throughs and whatever, a payment to Monograph happens on the same rail. They did it with Bitcoin in the beginning. Now they have their proprietary blockchain. The payment goes back to the sponsor for whatever they're selling, right? And then the payment goes to the website itself. So it's the tri-directional payment simultaneously with digital rights management, because it's on a blockchain. It can't be copied. It can't be stolen. It can't be cut and pasted somewhere else. So, I mean, that's just a simple example of a larger issue when it comes to IP. So these guys have been doing this since the beginning of blockchain. Mm-hmm. They were way out in front. But I see that as fundamentally changing the nature of IP as we move forward with omnidirectional payments, is what I was saying earlier. Is that if you all collaborate on GitHub, okay, let's just say, forget whether Microsoft shuts that down or not is another question, another panel. But let's just say that they leave it open and you all collaborate. So now the nature of IP actually gets a lot more dynamic. And if you look at that, that's where music, let's say, Alex was talking about earlier, that's where that's going. You have 3 different writers, producers, et cetera, agents who all have their cut of a piece of music that becomes famous. Boom, 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 boom. All the payments happen. The song can't be cut and pasted anywhere else. You can't share it. You either rent it, you own it, or you don't, or you listen to it. And every time that happens, a payment occurs through smart contracts immediately without banks, without intermediaries. And I think that is the common thread through all DRM and IP applications.
Well, it's interesting because the organization in the United States that handles music rights is actually working, they're working with IBM on a hyperledger, and that same group is actually working with the UK and France. And what's interesting is that that doesn't necessarily control that file or that actual digital music or representation of the music. It just documents the workflow of usage and rights management and payment throughout that complex tree. And I actually once, about 2 years ago, spoke to the chief legal counsel of one of the big movie houses. I'm not going to say which one. She called me and she said, I'm very interested in this blockchain that you post about because we use iTunes and we get no visibility. And every time we go to the judge and say, we need to have more data so we can understand the context of this, because we have a lot of people that need to get paid from the digital right usage, right? And the judge always says, no, you can't give it access. And she was asking, can we stick blockchain inside iTunes? And I was like, good luck with that one. I don't think that's going to happen. So I think that one thing is controlling that digital object and its use. And then the other one is sort of orchestrating that workflow of usage and payments. So you kind of need both pieces to work together.
Mm-hmm. So, Ignacio, so tell the audience what you're doing, the steps you're taking with APIs, basically, in blockchain, and how you're helping enterprises move forward.
Sorry, can you repeat? Sorry.
Yeah. So the applications that you're developing on blockchain at Getronics. So can you speak a little bit about, and maybe I'm being redundant here, but can you tell us exactly the business cases that you're dealing with right now?
Okay, I got it. No, the example I was explaining before is just to improve a current solution that we have, because we have, I think it's an added value to reduce the risk in the case that I have been explaining before, the risk of misunderstanding between the health provider and the catering provider. Maybe it could impact in the first that they are paying to the insurance companies, because it's a situation that can be very dangerous for the impatient. So if you can assure that your channel of communication is secure and integer, you can maybe reduce the rates with your insurance company that has to cover the problems that could happen in the future. Mm-hmm. These information exchanges, right? So I think we have two different situations. One if this that is related to our current solutions that we want to improve to offer added value to the market, reducing risk, improving efficiency, increasing security, whatever, right? And the other thing is when we are acting more as an integrator, trying to gather all the trends, all the technologies that maybe we are working on, or maybe our partners or the people that we know they are working with, just to gather all this stuff and trying to build stories, use cases, just to be able to improve the customer experience.
Nice. So I want to give each panelist 3 minutes to talk about what they think is the most exciting application of blockchain happening today. Alex. Right now, happening.
Bitcoin. Because I don't know why sometimes it's like you cannot say Bitcoin and everybody's asking like, a real application working? So it's been working for many years right now. And yeah, I work with blockchain technology. I love it. And but it's just a new database. Mm-hmm. So Bitcoin at some point tries to be a new financial system. So if we talk about innovation,
It has a great market cap. It is working.
it's working. It's like a lot of transactions, a lot of movements. I see Bitcoin not just as a coin per se. It's a platform. It's a platform to exchange any kind of assets on top of that.
It's a concept. It's not a particularly robust platform, quite frankly.
Yeah, but then for me, like Bitcoin, it's not a coin. It's like a share of a platform. I've used
It's the first ICO.
Yes. So and I think that's quite great.
Okay.
Well, that economic layer was a brilliant move that they added on because it allowed for this network effect that actually sort of shared with everybody the benefits of this technology. And then 2 years later, people looked under the covers and said, wow, this, what do we want to call it? Oh, blockchain. And then, all these great-great-grandchildren have evolved and, keep popping out.
Absolutely. Marcelo, what is the most profound use of blockchain you see today?
You mean other than CryptoKitties?
That's a pretty good one, actually, considering.
In fact, this is a good starting point to talk about non-fungible tokens, which is extremely serious and very important.
I totally agree with you. Yes.
And CryptoKit is just the first success story, and it happens to be foolish, but the principle isn't.
As we said, the pet rock
the
of the 21st century
is a very big deal. So I think that this is one of the important ones worth talking about. It's fairly complex.
Why is it important?
Because it allows us to create value out of nothing in a way that has never been possible before.
Who knows what CryptoKitties are? You heard Alex talk about it, so you kind of know. But anybody actually have experience? Anyone buy one? Nobody.
No, one.
One person. Okay.
One guy there.
I'm sorry. Go on, Marcelo. I just wanted to see.
So this is relevant. I mean, the fact that you can finally have digital assets that cannot be copied, as Alex mentioned in his presentation. This is very relevant. I have a friend who's working on a project called Superworld that basically mapped the whole planet, and you can buy 100 by 100 meter squares using Ethereum and the token, and what you do with that depends on how AR, VR is going to develop from here. But this is kind of far out, and it's not something that is going to make lives better. So that's not my choice. I mean, it's not like I'm a dog person or a cat person. It's just not as relevant as saving lives and improving the level of subsistence of people around the world. So very few people in countries like Spain and the European Union realize that millions of people die every year because they take fake medicine. They are given aspirin instead of transplant rejection medicine because the system is corrupt, someone is making a lot of money, and that's the way it is. And if you can have the provenance track record done in a way that makes corruption far more expensive to implement, it's never going to be impossible. But if corruption has a price tag that increases significantly through blockchain technologies, the corrupt or potentially corrupt person will probably seek other higher margin methods of practicing their skills.
So you're talking about trust, really, and transparency.
Yeah, and now you're talking about transparency, wine comes to mind. Leanne Camp was my guest speaker when we organized a symposium in the Middle East. She's brilliant. She's extremely good at what she's doing. She's been doing that for a very long time. And she's the founder of Everledger, right? We're the company that came up with the diamond solution. Diamonds are just the first step, because there was clearly a high-value item that required provenance certification. She's now into wine, making sure you're not drinking fake wine. And that's the transparency element, especially for the whites. So you have lots of elements that make life better.
Yeah.
Transparency and rank people.
Absolutely. Christina.
So you started off by asking if it could solve cancer or prevent cancer or whatever. I actually feel that the organization and the journey of data is so critical that I think that in terms of having the cause and effect through sort of a longer time span than just like a particular trial will provide some insights that today are not available, and partially because specifically in the United States, the continued journey across many, many different siloed systems is clearly impossible with HIPAA and all these different systems. And what's interesting is that you don't even own your data, right? But if you have the ability to permission that end-to-end journey, so that it could be used in effective ways for understanding maybe what your DNA says about your likelihood towards cancer, and what your behavior and all the things that are going on with respect to your own particular life. I think that having that continuous journey and access to that data and being able to permission the use of that will be very revolutionary. But I also wanted to say that what I think is kind of interesting, that's healthcare, but I think it's interesting in the financial space.
Today.
What, today?
Today. What's happening today?
Is happening today. So yes, the financial space is one that's happening today. And I think one of the things that the financial crisis opened up our eyes to is the fact that, like for example, if you have ownership of shares in your portfolio at an organization, there's a sort of netted function in that it's in custody, and so who actually owns it is in question when there's this settlement process. And so as a result of the 2008 financial crisis, there's been some interest in wanting to have clear ownership of whatever it might be. So having new models like fractional ownership. So I think right now the most interesting financial applications are the ones in which the tokenized ownership of assets of any kind will sort of revolutionize the whole sort of financial market and trading systems as we know them today. And those have already started to be built.
I'm going to give some life to that. So Joel Teltner, who's going to talk later, and myself, for the last 10 months have been engaged in a private equity real estate platform. It's a $200 million platform. And the best use of blockchain that I've seen, that I've been a part of, is opening up the ability to be financially inclusive. So it's a dual Regulation D and Regulation S token. So Regulation D, for those who don't know, this is Spain, but in US, the SEC says that that is a secure asset, okay? It's like a stock, so it's treated like a stock. Reg S allows us to have anybody from Spain or anywhere else participate in that as a non-accredited investor. So you can be $5, $10, $1,000, whatever you want to invest. So it isn't private equity that we're changing so much. It's the ability of anyone to be a part of that fund and for investors to realize the same returns that people with money get. Now, of course, they won't get the same amount of money because they're not investing the same amount of money, but they get the same ratio of returns, which is really important when you think about the impact that has in developing nations.
I just wanted to add one point, because Broadridge, which actually does voter and right management for publicly traded shares globally, I think they had managed like 80% of the global shares, which is really, really complex because it's a timing issue and custody issue, and sometimes shares are in custody, so they get double counted. So they'll try to take a shareholder's vote and end up with like 150% number of votes than there are shareholders. And so they're moving to, they just launched a blockchain version of their shareholders' right management, which is interesting in comparison to like the music rights. So I think that there's a lot of interesting problems, to your point, not just solutions being thrown out there, but interesting problems that blockchain is looking to solve.
Yeah, so I'm going to give you the last comment, my friend. What's the most exciting thing you see happening now in blockchain?
Can I give you two different, completely different answers?
You can give me whatever you want. You're giving it to them.
Okay. Now, for me, personally speaking, I think that the most exciting thing is the platform itself, because it's a nest of opportunities and challenges at the same time that is really, really exciting. So
you guys agree, Bitcoin?
Ethereum, by the way, yeah.
Yes,
but it's a platform per se. It's a change. Completely public platform.
Yes, because it's going to enable a lot of different things that we are maybe thinking today, we are about to think in the next future. So for me, it's amazing that the platform is already there, it exists, it's working, has to be improved in the future, but for me, it's really exciting. The second answer should be, it's about to come. I think we are not really yet aware of what's going to happen, because I remember that in the first presentation we saw a lot of different really interesting stuff, but we saw at the end 10 things that, okay, nobody knows. Maybe my opinion is that nobody knows today what's going to happen with these 10 blockers.
Yeah, no,
they are there. So it's, again, a really exciting issue to try to figure out what should be the next future with blockchain.
Absolutely. I mean, and I hope this translates well, but we're at the event horizon, if that translates well, the part where you can't see what really happens next. So we have to build it.
Absolutely.
Yeah?
Absolutely.
We have to build it. Do we have time for a couple of questions? Do we have a microphone out there? Does that young lady have a microphone? No? Okay. No questions. So I'm going to...
Because we answered them
We're
all.
really good.
We've answered everything. We are
was
great.
clear.
Thank you. I'm going to end with one really important thing that's happening right now that should be mentioned. Film financing and content financing, crowdfunding with tokens, is a very real thing. So there are at least 3 TV shows and 4 documentaries in Los Angeles right now that are being crowdfunded with a tokenized environment, with a tokenized platform. And that's super important because that means, again, it talks to music, it talks to any kind of content generation that's digital by nature. Different from fine art. Fine art's very hard to blockchain. So I can just, you put a RFID code, I just rip it off and boom, you break the chain. But digital rights management with crowdfunding will revolutionize intellectual property. It will revolutionize the payments. And I have firsthand experience. My aunt was married to a very famous singer. He died. It took her 25 years to get her royalty payments. She had to sue, and for 25 years she didn't get the payments, and she finally did. But she was old at that time, quite frankly, and she passed away as soon as she got them. God bless her. But that was the nature of the music business. That's radically changing, radically disintermediating, the content business, in general. So I want to thank everyone for your input, and I appreciate it. We could go off this way.
Take the mic with one of them. She will help you. The mic. Vamos a tener ahora una presentación más de Keynote antes de nuestro almuerzo, que será servido en el mismo lugar del café. ¿Sí? Ahora vamos a tener un momento solo estamos preparando el ponente. Ok. Me gustaría ahora de invitar para hablar sobre blockchain y energía, Lawrence Orsini.
Yeah. Good afternoon. Glad to find my way to Spain, to have a chance to talk with you folks about something really exciting happening in the energy industry. So I founded, LO3 Energy in about 2012. We really founded the company. I've got about a 20-year background in the energy industry. We really founded the company because we were watching some trends in the market. We were watching things change pretty rapidly in the market itself. So the industry is changing very quickly. What we're seeing is distributed generation. Generation is moving to the edge of the grid. The costs for renewable energy have come down so low that now you and I can actually buy technology to put on the roof of our house to make our own electricity. Wind turbines, micro combined heat and power. You can replace your boiler with a device that actually makes heat that you would need from the boiler and electricity at the very same time. One of the big issues is that as this technology finds its way to the edge of the grid, we don't have a utility grid that was built for distributed energy. Our grids were built to push energy one way. They were built 100 years ago to send energy from very big power plants to the edge of the grid. So the physical infrastructure actually gets smaller when you get to the edge of the grid. The wires are very big at the power plant, and they get very small as you get to the edge of the grid. So when you get distributed generation at the edge of the grid, you're starting to create two-way power flows across power lines that weren't built to handle two-way power flows. So these shifts in the energy industry are really changing the way we have to think about and architect our utility grids, and also changing the way that we think about how to actually pay the companies that we need to build and maintain those grids themselves, right? We're no longer in a place where we need to pay to build bigger grids. What we really need to do is focus on the optimization of the grid itself. So when I founded LO3 Energy, I was looking at this shift in the industry, seeing that things are moving to smaller and smaller segments of the grid, that we're actually moving to models where microgrids make a lot more sense, and that technology is really driving that change. So one of the big issues is going to be that we really don't have a control system to actually run the edge of the grid. When you start getting a lot of devices at the edge of the grid, digital devices, IoT devices, as well as generation, and electric vehicles are going to be the biggest issue here. You have to be able to coordinate the charge, the discharge of these devices. Just think about this. One fast-charging Tesla car looks like 2 houses to the utility grid in LA. In San Francisco, that one fast-charging Tesla looks like 10 houses because that utility grid is very different. So if you live in a cul-de-sac and you bring home a Tesla, you're probably okay. But if 2 of your neighbors bring them home, well, the grid wasn't actually designed for you to all plug those things in at the very same time. In fact, you'll do damage to the grid, or the utility wouldn't even allow you to have that many at that edge of the grid. So what you have to do is you actually have to coordinate devices. These devices need to be able to talk to each other and decide when one's going to charge, when one's going to discharge. If somebody's producing renewable electricity, that's a great time for everybody to charge. So this embedded intelligence has to find its way to the edge of the grid. So in order to do that, you need a really serious amount of data. You need information from the utility grid itself, right? So there is no one ubiquitous protocol for how to talk to an electricity grid, how to have a device speak to an electricity grid. There are a lot of devices that can collect the kind of information that we're talking about at the edge of the grid. But all of that data is locked up behind this lack of a protocol. So in the US, we tried to solve this problem in the Obama era. We funded an initiative called the Green Button. And so this was meant to be a database where you could actually take advanced meter data, just your utility data, electric data, and put it on this platform, and then third parties could actually come and build some of the technology we're talking about, to allow you to do things like change the time when your devices actually use electricity, or schedule the charging or discharging of your behind-the-meter battery, or devices like this. So that was about 7 years ago that they built it. Today, 7 years later, there is very little data on the platform. So that's not an indictment of the platform itself. The platform actually works just fine. The issue is there is no business model to get that data onto the platform. In fact, if I'm a utility and I take that advanced meter data, first off, I don't make any money when I put it on green button, so why would I expend the effort to do that unless a regulator tells me to? Secondly, as soon as it goes onto that platform, I've created risk for my business. Now third parties can actually access that data and they can build, potentially, competitive business models to my own. So green button is a great idea that's just lacking an actual business model. And this is one of the big problems that we're trying to fix with LO3. So what we're developing is a platform that actually solves that business model problem. So the idea is that the data that we're talking about, right? This is grid telemetry. This is, 5 pieces of data that come from the edge of the grid that all of the back-end control systems of the world work on and recognize. The idea is actually to take that data and make it valuable. So by taking those streams of data and encrypting them and putting them on a permissioned platform, you've instantly created a way to value something that was very hard to value before, right? This data is locked up in databases, right? Black box databases that every utility has, a lot of product manufacturers have. It's not that the data doesn't exist. We really need a way to actually get the data to a place where it can be used and useful. So by putting this permission system in place and tokenizing the data itself, you can now exchange. You have a medium of exchange for the data, the information. Now you have a way to put data on the platform and create value from it. You've, in essence, just turned a stream of data into a digital asset. And you've created the tools. You can create the tools built on top of this data to address some of the biggest issues in the energy industry. So here's a short video about the Exergy platform.
It wasn't long ago that we realized everyday items could turn into additional income. That second bedroom, put it on Airbnb. Your car? Make some extra money with Lyft. Like that unused bedroom, data on how we use energy has an incredible value. And people want that data. What if we could capture this data, secure it, and turn it into a digital asset, so you own and control the value, giving power to your community of households and businesses? What if that information was shareable, encrypted, and verified in a way that was safe and secure for millions of transactions at a time? The solution? Exergy. We built the Exergy network off of energy standards to turn that everyday data into tradable assets, giving people the choice to create value from their devices. For the new energy consumer, the Exergy token permissions the data to be shared on the platform. Once this information becomes ownable, new business models can emerge. The Exergy token, with the safety of blockchain technology, means this energy data can now be safely transacted to utility companies, retailers, and product manufacturers. All to provide new energy services for the world. Set the data free and join the revolution.
So this is a pretty fundamental issue for the energy industry as a whole, right? We don't have a lot of metrology at the distribution grid layer. We have a rapidly shifting architecture at the edge of the grid that has to be managed in a different way. This problem has to be solved. So I'm just going to talk through a couple of interesting use cases to maybe make it a little bit clearer how this data actually has value. So just on one end of the spectrum, so in the US, the value of your electricity bill, just that piece of paper and the numbers on it, is worth about $12.50 a month. So there are people, if they could access that data, can actually derive value from that data. So one of the ways that they could derive that value, and one of the ways that the data itself can, is that as an energy retailer, one of the hardest things you have to do in order to sell energy is go out and actually recruit customers, right? So I'm sure everybody loves people knocking on your door and trying to tell you about the new form of energy that you need to buy that doesn't come from the utility. So customer acquisition can be dramatically impacted by having just a bit of the data that we're talking about to help profile customers so that when these companies contact you, they actually bring value in the very first conversation, and they don't have to knock on the door, right? If you provide this data, you can actually have services provided to you that are benefit to you without the trouble of that. The complete other end of the spectrum is a very large insurance company, holds one of the largest portfolios of product warranties, device warranties. They would be really interested in knowing the power quality on various sections of the grid. So power quality is how well the grid runs. So if you've ever experienced the lights dimming a little bit or getting a little bit brighter in your house, you have a power quality issue. What's physically happening is the voltage in the network is sagging and drooping. So power quality is one of the lead indicators that the device will fail. In fact, when I moved to Brooklyn from Manhattan, we installed new LED lights in the entire building. These are supposed to last 15 years, right? 3.5 years later, we were replacing the lights because there are such power quality issues on the grid that it was actually burning out the drivers in the lights themselves. So as this insurance company is looking at it, it's like, if I could have that data, I could significantly de-risk my product warranty portfolio. So there are no end of the practical use cases for this data itself. Really, what we have to do is create a way for this data to be transacted. That's what we're really focused on with the Exergy project itself. So we've recognized that a 45-person company isn't going to write a global data standard. This has to be done in consortia. So we've created the Exergy Foundation. The foundation itself is meant to be populated with folks from industry who actually have an understanding of how the grid works, how data works, how market works, all of the keys that you would need in order to make the platform successful. Those companies have to be represented here. So our partners at Siemens are on one of the advisory boards for the foundation itself to help inform what sort of information we collect, what sort of value is actually available at the edge of the grid. This is a company that builds meter data management systems for large utilities across the globe, right? So they've got a built-in user base that's pretty global. So their interest in being involved in this is, how do we take this technology and actually expand the services that we offer our existing customer and create new services, right? Because now I can differentiate my products in interesting and new ways. So one of the other partners is Centrica, so one of the largest UK utilities. Actually, Centrica owns Direct Energy, which is one of the largest retailers of electricity in the US as well. So they're also a member of the foundation, an investor in the token platform itself, and participating in the growth of this. And the last I'll mention is EPEC Spot, so the European Power Exchange. Over half of the energy that's traded in Europe is traded across EPEC's platform. So they have a fundamental interest in how to create this platform, how data can actually drive access to wider markets, to further adoption. Because again, anyone who's building a virtual power plant, anyone who's selling a technology that engages with energy, anyone that's trying to do peer-to-peer trading, you all have to have this data in order for this world to actually shift. So on top of this, I'll tell you about what LO3 is building. So the transactive energy platform that sits on top of this data, again, a blockchain-based platform, is the core of what we're focused on. So we realized, pretty early on, there were high hopes that we'd have good access to data through Green Button and other platforms. Recognized pretty quickly that there is no scalable, viable business model that doesn't have us going out and solving this data problem. So the transactive grid layer, we've actually built a fast-running blockchain that allows self-executing contracts to do a lot of really interesting things. Like in the Cornwall project we're working on with Centrica, what this Cornwall LEM project, Local Energy Market Project, is about is, at its core, giving more value to consumers. So in Cornwall, just like you can in Brooklyn through the Brooklyn project, you'd be able to buy electricity from many new and different counterparties, right? So buying electricity from the neighbor across the street would be just as easy as buying it from a retailer that you've never met. In fact, one of the projects in Cornwall is to set up a reverse auction so that energy retailers can actually bid into the Cornwall project itself and make that market itself much more efficient. So going deeper than just buying and selling energy that's made in Cornwall, which folks in Cornwall actually are really interested in this. They have a high value for this because they understand that money they spend in Cornwall on energy stays in the community. So they understand that when you buy electricity from people in the community, those are dollars that stay here. If I buy electricity from Martha across the street, she's going to take the grandkids down and buy ice cream cones, right? She's not paying for a yacht in Texas somewhere. So they've got a really strong connection with the sort of physical transactions that are happening and the financial transactions and the community results of those things. Another important part of it is actually managing demand and flexibility on the grid itself. Just like we talked about, the grid is changing pretty significantly. The one thing that's not changing is that portion of your electricity bill that doesn't shift, that is associated with the delivery of the energy. We all have to pay for the pipes and the wires that bring the electrons and the gas to us. So what we're actually doing is we're exploring a different way to pay for that. Instead of paying for the entire thing, you can pay for the piece of the grid that you use in real time. This can be built into the contracts themselves. So ultimately, you'll see one price for energy that includes the delivery of energy itself. So the importance of that is kind of key. If I buy energy that's close, energy that's local, it's going to have a different price than buying energy that's far away and uses a lot more of the network. And so what this is really doing is it's helping financially reflect what is physically happening in the architecture of the grid itself. The idea that generation and load will meet, they will marry where consumption is actually happening. So Cornwall is going to be one of the first projects that we test that on. We've got another project in Australia, very similar, but it's going to go down to actual distribution grid assets. So down to the wires themselves, the transformers, the substations. So you can actually price the value of a transformer that's overheating on the network and change the flow of energy across that transformer by pricing into it. This fundamentally shifts the way that the grid runs, because now you have a real-time signal for the cost of the network itself. So that gives us choice. We can make different decisions based on that cost in near time. One of the other projects we're working on with the European Power Exchange is a project to connect the retail and the wholesale market so that you as a consumer or a prosumer, a person who produces and consumes electricity at the edge of the grid, can access that market. So you can actually buy energy from the wholesale market or sell excess energy into the wholesale market. So by connecting these two platforms, what we're doing is we're taking LO3 Energy's transactive grid and pairing it with EPEC's market. So you can imagine that from an energy retailer's perspective, I'd be pretty worried about that, right? Retailers are the middlemen in this equation. In fact, when we had the initial conversations with EPEX, they much of the same thing, right? They recognize that the disruptive technology that we're talking about will come to disrupt them as well. So instead of waiting for that to happen, they're proactively looking at how do they incorporate this into their existing business model. How are they going to be a part of the revolution instead of a casualty of the revolution? So the last project that I'll tell you about is another interesting one. This is in partnership with Direct Energy. So, and maybe you'll see the ties here, I'll explain it to you. But what we're doing with Direct is we're creating a micro-hedging platform. So in the energy industry, if I'm a large consumer of energy, I like to buy big, cheap, economically efficient blocks of energy, right? So the bigger the block I can buy, usually the more economically efficient it is. It's cheaper. So there is always this variable point where I'm not 100% sure, and actually the closer we get, the less likely that we're sure that you're going to consume a piece of this energy. So you've got a big block of stuff you know you're going to have to use, and then you've got a variable part. It's like I know that my use is going to change based on weather, based on traffic through my store, based on all the other variables that exist in business. So I have to hedge that, right? I have to make a bet that I'm going to use some part of that. And then I can actually trade that hedge back into the market. There are different ways financially I can manage that. So today, managing those hedges is actually pretty tough. Direct says they have really blunt instruments to be able to do that. You know, the closest you can get on one of the more innovative hedging products they've got is about a week. You can buy about a week's worth of energy. So that's, you know, better than a month. It's definitely better than a year. But in reducing that hedge, what you're doing is gaining economic efficiency. You can actually make different bets. You can actually buy smaller chunks of energy because you can shrink the hedge itself. So we're actually pushing, through micro-hedging, down to 15-minute timescales. We're going to go lower than that. So not only to the wholesale market, but also peer-to-peer. So participants in the platform themselves are going to be buying energy from other participants in the platform in a peer-to-peer fashion. Not only the production of electricity, overproduction, say, you know, with a large PV plant, but also demand response and flexibility. Sometimes that'll be cheaper and way more economically efficient than buying the energy itself. So you can see that, you know, through the arc of these three projects, what we're really doing is fundamentally shifting the relationship that we consumers have with energy, putting a bit more choice and control into people's hands. So down to the grid level, the community level where we live, tokenizing the value of energy and allowing you to layer on important things that you don't get to today. Putting a reputation system on that, giving me choice of who I want to buy my energy from, not just how much I pay for it, right? Unfortunately, most of the world today, utilities still look at you as a ratepayer. You're somebody who's obligated to buy the thing that they're selling you. Well, fundamentally, we're shifting some of that. So by giving choice at the edge of the grid, by actually, you know, giving you choice in who and how you can buy energy and creating a platform that ensures the economic efficiency of that, we're really shifting the way that the energy markets are going to work in the future. And again, doing this with large multinational partners who have a very similar vision of where the energy markets are actually going. At this point, we have 10 projects, actually 11. We're announcing one in Tokyo here this week. 10 projects running globally. We've got another 50 that are in the pipeline. We're being very choosy about the projects and very choosy about the partners. We're a small technology company. The only way we can do this is by having strong partners, local partners, working in the regions that have existing consumers, have existing networks, existing platforms. We're not going to go out and sell you utility meters and recruit people. So the reason to distribute these projects globally is very important. People think very differently about energy in different places of the world. A couple of examples. In Brooklyn, when we started the Brooklyn project, one of the first things we did was we went out into the community and held some focus groups. We actually talked to people about energy and talked to them about the utility grid. So when we got into the conversation and started talking about what green energy really was, when you pay a premium for green electricity, what does that really mean? So these Brooklynites, when they found out that, well, yes, when you buy green energy globally somewhere, green energy is being made, and what you're buying is a renewable energy certificate. It is the value of the environmental impact of that kilowatt hour. But that's not in your community. That could be anywhere. In fact, one of the women there, Janet, said, well, wait a minute. Are you saying I'm not actually getting the thing I thought I was paying for? So then where does my electricity come from? I'm like, well, we can walk outside and point to the smokestack where your electricity comes from. Right? This is where the electrons are produced. These are the wires that they travel across between them. She's like, hold on. So I've been a wind consumer for probably about 8 years, and I have used more energy than I probably would have because I want to support the industry. Are you telling me I'm actually polluting my neighborhood more? It's like, unfortunately, that's the point. That is actually the way that it works. So it's not that people aren't producing renewable energy in your community. It's just you can't buy it from them today, right? They can't actually participate in the wholesale market. The efficiency of transacting a small amount of energy, you wouldn't do that, right? Regulators won't even allow you to do this. So juxtapose this, because people in Brooklyn really want this, right? They want the free-range, homegrown, locally brewed electrons from Brooklyn. Juxtapose this with Australia, right? So Australia, South Australia has some of the biggest grid physics issues on the planet. And one of the big drivers behind this is that they had very high feed-in tariffs for renewables a ways back. And so they've got pretty high penetrations of distributed renewables on their grid. So, but economically, those incentives, the feed-in tariffs, were designed to decline. And Germany has the very same problem over the years. So in South Australia, at this point, people that are getting paid for the renewable energy that they're putting back on the grid are actually being paid significantly less than the wholesale value of the electricity. But they're so small that they can't participate in the wholesale market and make up that value. Meanwhile, the neighbor across the street is paying a premium on wholesale because they have to buy from a retailer. So you've got two people on the opposite side of the street that are looking at each other going, if I could just buy your excess electrons, I could get them cheaper, and you could make more money for your electrons. This is happening in multiple places around the globe, but it's important to really understand the dynamics, because humans adopt technology. Right? Technology doesn't adopt us. So we need to be able to work with people to understand how they want to use the technology, what it is they're actually solving for, and then provide the platform that actually allows them to do some of that. So it's really important, and that's one of the reasons that we have a physical diversity of the projects and the business models that we're testing. Maybe even more importantly is every one of these projects we are testing variations on business model. So after being in the energy industry for a number of years, I always find it humorous when I hear people talking about what the utility of the future looks like, what the business model for the utility of the future is. Anybody that tells you they know what it is confused, right? We're talking about technology enabling new and innovative ways to think about energy, right? You have to test those business models. You have to see what works. Because ultimately, not only do we have to solve a data problem, we have to solve a regulatory problem. So as a regulator who needs to change regulations so that it can catch up with technology, so that those two neighbors in Australia can sell electricity to each other, I can't make regulatory and policy changes based on thought experiments. I have to have proof. I have to see, first, that this is something that people want to do. Secondly, that it doesn't break the grid, right? Everybody needs the grid. We don't want to break the grid. More importantly, that it doesn't break some of the core business models that run the grid. We can't have our utilities going out of business. Who's going to take care of the wires? A blockchain can't fix wires. So be careful about who you're talking about disintermediating. And then, maybe the last most important piece of it is that industry has to come along to help inform this regulatory process. That's why it's so important, again, to have a consortia actually working on this, engaging with policymakers in these conversations. So I come back to a conversation that I had at the UN in New York a couple of months ago. And I was speaking at a dinner with a bunch of the delegates. And I'd spent the day listening to all these pronouncements. We're going to have 50, 75. There was even claims of 100% renewable energy in our countries. And I stopped and I said, you have two fundamental problems. First, the grid doesn't work that way today. You can't reach that kind of penetration physically on the network today. We have to run our grids differently. The second one is, you can't break the business models. We need to pay our utilities differently. We don't need to pay them to build bigger grids. We need to pay them to increase the utilization of the grid. That's going to take a massive amount of data. Consider this little factoid. In New York, where I'm from, Con Edison is arguably one of the oldest networks on the planet. Actually, from Brooklyn, we can see Pearl Street, where the first power station ever was. But so in Con Ed's territory, the utilization, the average use of the electricity grid is about 50%, 50 to 60%, most of the time. So there are some 15 hours a year where you use the last 20% of the grid. You've got 20% of that asset that is sitting and waiting for a very tiny window. That is one of the most expensive investments in infrastructure you can imagine. It's not that we can't manage it differently. You could actually solve that problem in multiple different ways. It's just that we've paid the utility to build that. They make money when they do capital projects. They deploy large capital, they get a regulated rate of return. So it's their incentive to build for the peak. It's actually their incentive to drive peaks to build for. So the shift we're talking about in New York is really shifting to a different payment structure where they actually get paid for the utilization of the grid. So the more the grid is used, the more money they have. This actually aligns economically for them with the future very well, right? Once you do that, now they have an incentive to get electric vehicles on their grid. They have an incentive for distributed generation, flexibility, because they get paid when they increase the use and the flexibility of the grid itself. So fundamentally, we have to rethink what we're doing with energy. All of this stuff is happening in real time, but it takes a serious amount of effort and focus to do it. So at this point, we had to build our own meters because nobody made a utility meter that would host a blockchain. Our meters actually do host the blockchain, so the blockchain runs on the meters. It's actually calculating, it's netting the energy that goes back on the grid. Some of them can actually control devices and manage flexibility, storage inside the house. And more importantly, that network actually physically hosts the blockchain itself and the virtual machine that helps drive some of the logic and decisions around transactions. We've built the apps that sit on top of that. So you can go on Google Play or iTunes and you can download Community Microgrid or the Brooklyn Microgrid app or LAMP or Landau. There are several apps on there. You can actually go in and take a look at them if you like. They're not going to do anything for you yet. They're only for the specific projects we're working on, but if you like. And then the data platform. So the meters that we have deployed are actually streaming data real time into the platform itself. We're still working on the tokenization model for this data. It's a pretty complex problem that we're solving in needing to make sure the incentives are in the right place so that everybody in that arc is a winner is an important piece of this, of the work that we're doing. We're in the middle of a private sale of the token now. So, European Power Exchange is an investor in the token. Centrica is an investor in the token. We've got partners in Bitfury, Galaxy, Digital, other folks that are contributing to the platform, Siemens, actually, as well. So we have our first implementations out there. We're expecting to do the formal network launch next year, where we'll release the code. We'll give you access and actually put bug bounties on top of the code itself because we want to see people break it. One of the most important things for me is that we're a do tank, we're not a think tank. So we want to build things and we want to break them. It is our job to break the things that we build and fix them fast. And then after that, after the bug bounties and after the network's stable, we'll go to the full release. The token will move to the exchange and we'll actually deploy it more globally. So you have to have a good team to do this. Like I said, I've got a long background in the energy industry. One of my co-founders, Bill Collins, has a long background in the finance industry as well. In fact, he was with EcoSecurities, which was one of the largest trader of carbon credits in the world until they were acquired. Sean Montgomery, actually we got him from Intel. He was one of the chief architects of Hyperledger's sawtooth leg that Intel put together. So we have Sean actually working, well, this is our third rev of the blockchain. But Sean and the team building that. Andrew is actually an amazing hardware guy. He's, talk about art. The way this guy can put together, just the disparate number of things that we're trying to do and actually get it all to fit into a box that's about this big. It's just unbelievable. And then, the rest of the team here. So it takes really good focused team with an understanding of a pretty diverse understanding of technology, policy, utilities, as well as industry to be able to pull this sort of thing off. And that's what we're working on. Look for Exergy, the launch, end of next year.
Ahora vamos al almuerzo en el mismo lugar que fue servido el café. Porfa, contamos con todos vosotros después del almuerzo. Sí, tenemos evento hasta la noche hoy. Muchas gracias.
Tears of